Absolutely no chance.
The BCCI has gone into headmaster mode with its new guidelines for the Indian players. So from now on, the players are not allowed to travel separately. Their families can be around for only 2 weeks on longer tours, and they have to be available for domestic cricket because that will be factored into national selection. Now, all this is being done apparently to promote unity, discipline, and create a positive team environment. So, what are your initial thoughts, Ayaz?
Well, Anirudh, it looks like Moses has come down with the Ten Commandments. It's some of it is obviously necessary, and it's a no-brainer. I mean, for instance, to play domestic cricket is something that should have never been forsaken. Why should you have excused players for so many years not to play? I mean, people like Virat Kohli and Rohit Sharma, even Jasprit Bumrah, some of these big stars have not played domestic cricket for n number of years. So that awakening is timely, it's good, but some of the other things are I find quite regressive. I mean, to pass the buck onto the wives or girlfriends, saying that because they were present throughout the tour, the results have not been as good as they would have liked, is actually ignoring. I mean, would you say that India reached the WTC final twice because the wives were there, irrespective or despite the wives, or won the T20 World Cup though the wives and girlfriends were there too? So I think the guidelines, and I don't know how much of it will be really enforced. The guidelines is much like the curate's egg, curate's egg. It's good and bad in parts.
Yeah. So especially with the family bit, I don't know how having your loved ones around affects your game if it does. So do you think at least with you said like some of these rules are necessary, but do you think at least with some of them the players are kind of being treated like children?
Yeah, I mean, look, the overarching feeling seems to be like, now let us tell you what needs to be done. But I mean, as the apex body, sports body, the BCCI, you don't need to wake up after a calamity to enforce or to ensure certain things are put in place, which are absolutely, it was a no-brainer, as I say. It should have been mandatory, like playing domestic cricket, like traveling in the same team bus, all of them. I mean, why does this have to be enforced? Shouldn't it have just been conveyed from the team management like, look, guys, everybody has to travel together? You don't need guidelines for that. I mean, if somebody was breaking the protocol, then that person should have been singled out, that individual, and said this can't happen. So, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, the situation was that all the players, especially the big stars, were handled with kids' gloves, and now it seems that let's crack down on teach them. It's taking them back to KG and nursery and saying this is how cricket needs to be played, or the Indian cricket team needs to behave, or the big stars need to perform. I think, as I mentioned, that uh, there is obviously pressure on the players as well as on the board to take some action. The players, what action they take for themselves, it will be reflected in how they perform in the matches leading up to the next Test series or the Champions Trophy or other major tournaments. But how the BCCI responds is not something that must move in fits and starts. That if you win a series, if you win the World Cup, the celebrations go on for 6 months. But if you lose a series, then suddenly everybody is cracking the whip. There's pressure on the coach. I mean, one other issue, Anirudh, which I think this guidelines does not address, or at least not discernibly, is that where is the question of accountability? What are the measures? Is there any measure of accountability of the players? Yes, and also of the support staff, the coach, etc. What about issues like what happened with R Ashwin? Why did he have to quit the series midway? We've heard from him the explanations. Is there a fact finding kind of action put in place? In the old days, I remember that after a tour, the team would come back, the captain and the manager would submit a confidential report to the BCCI saying, these are the things that happened, this is what went right, this is what went wrong, these are what our suggestions are. Is something like that being practiced, or is that being completely discarded and now it's like, wake up when there is a problem, when there is a crisis, and otherwise put the blanket over your head and go to sleep?
Yeah. So like you said, I mean, there could be an overcorrection in the sense. So well, let's see what happens. Let's say India win the Champions Trophy. Now, is everything forgotten then? is everyone just celebrating then? So do you foresee, like, especially senior players, breaching some of these guidelines? Because especially with being available for domestic cricket throughout the calendar, they already play a lot. But do you think someone like, especially someone like Jasprit Bumrah, do we expect Jasprit Bumrah to play more cricket?
That's a very good question, because now it depends on how we see Jasprit Bumrah, who's now our most valuable commodity in Indian cricket, perhaps even in international cricket. The way he's performed in the World Cup, T20 World Cup, in this series, and before that in the series against England. So he's really now, he's a cult figure. I mean, he's a preeminent cricketer in the world. I think the only rival he's got is Pat Cummins. And Pat Cummins, because he's so influential as the captain, perhaps in a sense, moves, at least is Bumrah's equal, if not a little ahead. But leave that aside. Bumrah's workload is something which is a priority issue. So are they going to address it? How are they going to address it? If they, I mean, obviously they have to take the bowler and his support staff and his medical staff and medical opinion into account. And I think, remember, in the series against New Zealand, Bumrah didn't play the third test, which was played at home. So he's also measuring out his workload himself in many ways. Is that going to be entertained, or is it going to be done only by the BCCI? Is there something working in tandem? Is there a brains trust to look at these issues? It's not just Bumrah is the obvious example. It could be other players going ahead. So I think that a lot of loose strands still exist. I mean, the fact that there have been guidelines issued suggests that the BCCI is taking cognizance of a setback, a major setback, and saying, let's find out ways to address this now. And then, therefore, they've come out with a slew of suggestions. These are still, these are not hard rules that have been put in place. These are guidelines that have been discussed, like, for instance, playing domestic cricket. I mean, there is nothing which had said that you don't have to play domestic cricket. It was because the BCCI was turning a blind eye to it for so many years. So now, yes, if it does, it then make it a matter of policy. Put it down in black and white that, you have to play X number of matches in domestic cricket every year, irrespective of your international engagements. Otherwise, unless the BCCI decides otherwise, and things like that. I mean, wives and girlfriends being allowed on tour, not allowed, how many days should they be there? These to me are not major issues. These are, I mean, the Australian cricket team had their wives and girlfriends all over the cricket grounds of Australia in the recent series. They've been there in England when they won the WTC. They were there in Abu Dhabi and Dubai when they won the T20 World Cup. So to attribute the setback to wives and girlfriends, I think is a little, is delusional. It could be a small factor. It can't be a major factor. I don't think it is really worthy of a guideline, in my opinion. Before we wind up, I just wanted to add, there are two sets of, pursuits that India now have to think about. One is the white ball cricket, which is the Champions Trophy. After that, the T20 World Cup, and then the World Cup. And then there's Test cricket. After the inauguration of the WTC, we missed out the first time. Otherwise, it would have been a hat trick of appearances in the final. We are not there this time. And the policies, selection policies, as well as other policies and guidelines, might actually differ. Workload, for instance, might differ from white ball to red ball cricket. So I hope cognizance is taken even of that. We've talked so much about the failure of Rohit and Virat and some of the others in white ball cricket. So will they be judged on Champions Trophy, or will they be judged on white ball cricket going ahead? These are issues that need to be addressed.
Yeah, so overall, interesting times ahead for Indian cricket, and the Champions Trophy squad is expected any day now, and we'll come back to you right after that squad is announced. So that's it for this episode of Sports Room. We'll see you next time.